I'm closer to the golden dawn, immersed in Crowler's uniform of imagery. I'm living in a silent film, portraying Himmler's realm of dream reality. I'm frightened by the total goal, drawing to the ragged hole, and I ain't got the power anymore. No, I ain't got the power anymore. I'm the twisted name on Garbo's eyes, living proof of Churchill's lies. I'm destiny.
Well, awesome. I'd like to thank you for allowing us into your homes for this 9th episode of Season 5 of Esoteric Science Roundtable. And I would like to thank my guest, who you can't see because he's on the phone, Daniel Bentkowski. And Kent has his own blog, which is the KentTraversyPapers.net, and we'll have a graphic for that in a second. But this evening's discussion will be magic and music, and so we're going to delve into some of the imagery and symbolism that many of the well-known rock bands, mostly from the 70s and some from the 60s as well, have used and do use, and we're going to comment a bit on that and try to delve into obviously the meanings behind the symbolism as much as we're able to, and then also to maybe consider as well why these bands would be so interested in using this symbolism, this occult or esoteric symbolism. Kent, thank you very much for calling in. I do appreciate you taking the time to be on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Corey. I do appreciate coming on. Thank you.
Great. So I know that you've obviously done quite a bit of research and you've done some writing on this. And I also want to thank our mutual acquaintance Freeman for at least at some level helping to accommodate us getting together and being able to do this. The first image that we've got here, some may be familiar with from the interior of the Led Zeppelin 4 album, and shows the elderly looking man in a cloak holding a lamp with the Star of David symbol in the lamp. And Kent, did you want to mention anything in particular about that symbol?
Yeah, sure. This is the tarot card of the Hermit.
Yes.
And this is just one of many, many occult symbols that are associated with the band Led Zeppelin, and specifically with Led Zeppelin 4.
Okay, they definitely do tend to use a lot of magical imagery, and in particular, Jimmy Page seems to be the main culprit that is behind this, and some may be familiar with the fact that he did actually live in Crowley's home that I believe was adjacent to Loch Ness, if I'm not mistaken, for a number of years, and that's just one indication that would show you, how much of an interest that Jimmy Page has in this sort of information, that he would be willing to move into the home of a well-known magician. And so that's interesting to me. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Jimmy Page is an interesting character because he happens to hold the position of Magus in the OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis. This is the second highest degree that a person can get in this system. And from 1971 until 1994, he did own Boleskine House on the shores of Loch Ness, and this is a location where Crowley had done the works of the Middle Ages magician called the Bramelin. And this is an operation, a magical operation that takes 18 months to carry out in its entirety. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, Jimmy Page also owned an occult bookstore in London, and beyond that, there are many, many things related to lyrical content, to the music, aspects of their concert performances, and also matters related to Jimmy Page's on-stage attire, which also were related to magic.
Okay, so I did read somewhat of your commentary on the 4 symbols that are represented in Led Zeppelin 4. Would you care to comment on those as well? We have an image of those up currently.
Yeah, these are the 4 symbols that are the most identified with the band. And to begin, we have the Jimmy Page Zoso symbol, as it's known. Now, this is a combination symbol related to the ancient symbol of Saturn, which happens to be the astrological sun sign under which Page was born in January 1947. In addition to that, we also have him on stage. He would wear a pair of pants where at the top of the pants near his pocket would be the symbol for Capricorn, which was his sun sign. Underneath would be the symbol for Scorpio, which was Page's ascendant sign. And at the bottom was a symbol for Cancer, Page's moon sign. In addition, next we have the symbol for John Paul Jones. This symbol is known as the triquetra, which is a symbol intersected by 3 Vesica Pisces symbols, which are oriented around a circle. This is a sign that's used to exorcise evil spirits and is used in protection magic. And I think it's very interesting that out of the 4 band members, John Paul Jones, throughout the history of the band, was completely exempt from any of the accidents or unfortunate incidents that had plagued the other 3 members, even including John Bonham's death. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, as I had mentioned Bonham, we have the sigil of John Bonham, which is an early symbol of the Trinity. This is the 3 interlocking rings, which can also be looked upon as a symbol of the drums that he played, and also to the earth element. In addition to this, in Egyptian lore, this symbol represented Osiris, Isis, and Horus, which was the first known expression of the the father, mother, child trinity, which in Christian lore had become Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. Finally, we have Robert Plant's symbol, which is a feather inside of a circle. This is the feather of Mat, the Egyptian goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order or balance. The husband of Mat was the scribal god Thoth, the god of writing, knowledge, and truth. For a poet and for a lyricist, the feather of Mat is a very fitting symbol. In Plant's lyrics, he frequently mentioned things such as Tolkien mythos, Druidic magical themes, and also his lyrics for the 1979 song Carousel Ambra, which is on their very last studio album, In Through the Outdoor, has several references to Thelema, the belief system of Jimmy Page.
It's interesting also, there has been some allegation, and I can't really substantiate one way or the other, that Jimmy Page's magical practices may have either endangered or been potentially directed at other band members and other people. You've probably heard this as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, this has been an ongoing rumor throughout the many years that the band had begun to experience deaths in the family and mysterious car accidents. In the case of Jimmy Page himself, he was addicted to heroin for a number of years. And as I had mentioned a moment ago, John Bonham met an early death. All of this is extremely circumstantial and may provide a priori evidence of this being the case, but we don't have complete proof of this, so to speak.
Sure. The next image we have is also a Zeppelin image, and this is from the inside double fold of the Houses of the Holy, and it shows a white, completely shaved figure holding a small child above his head on a rocky precipice, as if to indicate potentially a sacrifice or something. You know, it's really what the imagery, very ominous imagery, seems to indicate.
Yes, here again we have the illusion, the allegory, the symbolism, the archetype of the pagan practices of sacrifice. And they believed that in order to receive benefit from the gods, that they had to sacrifice like the firstborn child, the firstborn son of the family to the gods. And that could very well be the reason for that imagery on that album.
Okay, I think we've got one other image to describe regarding Zeppelin. Okay, this is an image from The Song Remains the Same. This is looks very similar to the Hermit in the first image, and there is a light display that's a sword wand looking display, and there's a skull image as well. It's kind of a very psychedelic image. It's got this strange color effect going on, but again it looks very, very magical, and again with the skull imagery kind of superimposed in the corner, it's very, very ominous to say the least.
Yeah, this is an expression of what is known as the death's head. And this is expressed in the occult order Skull and Bones, for example. Mm-hmm. And also another band that used this similar type of imagery was the Grateful Dead. Mm-hmm. And in a few moments I'd like to talk more about them if we could.
Sure, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to show one more image of Led Zeppelin quickly. And I don't know how well folks can see this at home, but there's, well, you can't really see it. I thought I would be able to capture it somewhat with the light. I got a real close-up shot of Led Zeppelin 3 where it says "So Mote Be It" on the interior of the vinyl. And I found that on both sides of my particular copy of the record anyway, and so that's definitely a magical injunction. Most often you hear it as I'm getting confused here. Okay, but instead of "So Mote Be It," it's so mote it be. Thank you, my producer is helping me.
So mote it be.
Yeah, that's what you normally hear it as, but nonetheless, same concept there. Okay, that's all we really have from Zeppelin, and again, we could do a whole show on those folks. But if you want to go ahead and get into the Grateful Dead, please, by all means, do so.
Yeah, sure. The Grateful Dead had some very interesting symbolism associated with their band. For example, you frequently saw the red rose of the Rosicrucians being part of their designs of the album covers, T-shirts, and other types of graphic imagery associated with the band. In addition to that, we also have the death skull again and the skeleton imagery. Also, they have a song called Dark Star. And this is a reference to the hidden or concealed twin of the sun in our very solar system, which is rumored to be the second sun in our solar system. So I find those aspects very interesting as well.
That is interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about them so much in conjunction with that, but that is definitely true as far as a lot of the skull and skeleton imagery and a lot of roses as well. The next image that we have is a close-up from the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts record, and I've got the close-up of Crowley in the mix with all these other famous, infamous, and reasonably well-known folks as well. And why do you think it is that they bothered to implant Crowley in there with all these other people?
Well, on the CD version of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the most recent version of the CD has the booklet inside where it explains that these were people that the Beatles admired in terms of either having made an influence upon their life, or they looked upon them as a spiritual type of a guru, or similar respect put upon these individuals. What's interesting about this is John Lennon was responsible for this image being put on that album cover. Most people believe that George Harrison was the quote-unquote magical Beatle, and this really isn't true. While it is true that Harrison studied Eastern philosophies and practiced Eastern philosophies exclusively in his adult life, John Lennon was the actual Beatle who studied very intimately the concepts of magic. In addition to that, when the Beatles had broken up, and when they were getting to the point where they were going to be breaking up, John Lennon started making appearances in a bag with Yoko Ono, and they talked about bag peace and all this sort of thing. And I looked into the symbolism of this, and I took a look at the 30 Enochian ethers, of which the 28th is related to the BAG concept. And this is related to spiritual ascension and consciousness that transcends the known universe. And these are the concepts that Lennon was bringing forth during these appearances. He would talk about how they needed to rise above war and how there needed to be spiritual ascension in the world, and that this was important. And this is also tied into the tarot card, the Star, which also relates to this concept as well.
That's interesting. The next image I have is just a little brief partial, it's part of the lyrics from the Mind Games album that that Lennon releases as a solo artist, and it's the song Bring on the Lucy, Free to People. And it is interesting that it seems as if either, I suppose, he had a change of heart or something along those lines, because it seems as if he's trying to expose the very power brokers that would be, the proponents of this sort of magic and this sort of magical enslavement of the masses. And so it's curious to me as well that I'm sure you would be of the mind that, obviously he was assassinated, and it seems as if this was a mind control assassination. But my thinking is that he was starting to expose some things that the establishment did not want him to, and so they needed to get rid of him. And certainly if he would have asked for a million people to march on the mall of the Capitol in the name of peace, I think he could have pulled that off. And so I just want to get your quick last comments on Lennon and the Beatles before we move on.
Yeah, specifically, there's one other aspect of the lyrics to Bring on the Lucy, which really do tie into his death. Mark David Chapman was the individual who killed John Lennon.
Right.
And there are many aspects of this young man's life that do tie into mind control. What I found most interesting in terms of a parallel between Lennon's assassination and the lyrics to this song in particular is that Mark David Chapman, before the assassination, after he had been arrested, he had given a statement to the police where he said he kept hearing in his mind the words, "Do it, do it, do it," over and over again. And if we dip into the lyrics of Bring on the Lucy, Free to People, we find the lyric, "Do it, do it, do it, do it now."
Right, good point.
And, this type of coincidence is just too much to pass up. And I do believe that it had played a very important part in this murder in terms of perhaps maybe Chapman was told to listen to this particular song off of Mind Games before this assassination took place. And furthermore, the title of the album, Mind Games, also ties into this, into the mind control concept as well.
Oh.
And, once again, just too damn much coincidence to really pass up.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you. Okay, well, I'd like to go ahead and move on to the band Kiss. And I just want to make a quick statement. This is the first band that really got me into music, listening to music on my own. Somebody, a neighbor, actually the neighbor's grandkid, gave me a 45 of Shock Me and Strutter 78. And that 45 forever changed my life. I have to say, if the one action that I can think of in my past that really, really just changed my whole stream of my whole life's outcome, really, stemmed from me receiving that 45, and they made a huge impact on me. I was 9 years old at the time, and I think that really has made a profound impact on me. But we've got the image from the solo albums, and if you maybe want to elaborate on some of the imagery from the makeup that the guys in Kiss wore. Yeah,
sure. We'll start with Paul Stanley, the self-professed star child. Actually is a representation of the Greek god of Dionysus. Now, Dionysus was a hermaphroditic character which incorporated both the male and the female into the one being. And the interesting thing about this is that Paul Stanley on stage, the way he dresses and the costumes that he wears are oftentimes effeminate, and yet at the same time highly masculine. He also presents himself as being this sort of a non-threatening lover type of character as well. And having this androgyny associated with it, he provides this unthreatened type of image to the audience, where the male members of the audience are not necessarily going to be too threatened by him that, he's going to steal my girlfriend and all that type of stuff. The other thing about him is that Dionysus was the Greek god of wine, or having a good time. And as we know, many of the Kiss songs are talking about rock and roll all night and partying all day long. And so that ties into the concepts in the lyrics of the band as well. Ace Frehley is a very interesting character, an expression of what you might call an ancient astronaut. His makeup being this seismic or electrical wavelength which dances across his face. And there's many, many aspects of Frehley's music that ties into this space ace type of character. Shock Me, the song that you just mentioned, Rocket Ride, Into the Void, and so on and so forth. There are also a number of songs which tie into his alcohol and drug problems, such as Cold Gin, Ozone, Snowblind. He was known to be a very big cocaine user, and ultimately his drug use was what led to his being thrown out of the band. Mm-hmm. Gene Simmons, in particular, is very anti-drug, and so that was not meant to be a long-term thing for Frehley in that band. However, Ace did provide a very interesting counterbalance to Stanley's extroversion, the way he presented himself as being almost dazed. Quite possibly he was stoned out of his mind half the time, as the stories do tell us at this point. And but it did provide a balance, nonetheless, to the extroversion of Paul Stanley. Now, when Ace Frehley left the band, he was replaced by a guy named Vincent Cusano, who had the stage name of Vinnie Vincent. And the very interesting thing about him is that he had an Egyptian ankh on his face, a symbol of the fluids of life. And once again, this ties back into the ancient Egyptian concepts. And we find that the ankh is also associated with life-giving, life-sustaining liquids, air and food, the life force of plant life, and also sexual abundance and sexual production, having children, and so forth. The ankh also is associated with a ritual purification that took place at the Temple of Karnak. Instead of streams of water in the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, you'll see streams of ankhs that are being given to the kings of these depictions. So this is very interesting as well, that this ties into the symbolism of Kiss. Peter Criss, the Catman, is actually a representation of the Egyptian goddess Bast, which is this cat goddess. And Bast was protecting her offspring, and also was responsible for destroying the sun's serpent enemy called Apophis. Bast was also associated with the eye of the moon, and this is why in many of the photo shoots and posters that they had done with Peter Criss, you'll see him in a setting that includes a full moon in that graphic or photograph. In keeping with the nighttime theme of this idea here, Paul Stanley sings about how he's the king of the nighttime world. Mm-hmm. Also, Peter Criss had a very large number 3 on the back of his vest, and also some tattoos that incorporated the number 3. While we might think, because he's Italian-Irish individual, that this is somehow tied into the Christian Trinity, as I said a few minutes ago, the very first representation of the Father, Mother, and Child was Osiris, Isis, and Horus. And if we go farther back into Babylon and so forth, this carries through there as well.
One simple explanation is that he was the third person to join the band, and that's what I've always heard is the reason, the representation for the 3 is that he was the third addition to Kiss. So there could be something more to it, certainly, but that's what I've always heard is just your obvious pat answer. Yeah.
Oftentimes here we see that there is an exoteric or a public explanation, and then there is the esoteric or the real explanation of how this came to be.
Right.
A couple of the other band members that have been in this band, when Peter Criss left, there was a guy come into the band named Paul Caravallo, who went by the stage name of Eric Carr. He dressed up like a fox, and this is a symbol associated with the mythology of the Scandinavian god Odin. And this Nordic god used to fly upon these winged horses over battlefields, and were protected by a group called the Valkyries, and this was related to dying bravely in battle and so forth. So the fox also has a long history of magic, in association with magic as well. It's a creature of the night, and once again, that's an album title of one of the Kiss albums, Creatures of the Night.
Correct.
Is often related to supernatural powers. The magic world, hours between dusk and dawn, are referred to as the between times. When the magical world intersects with the world of the five senses. And there is also this idea that magic is born within the female energies, and this is also another reason for the feminine being interjected into these masculine characters in the band Kiss.
Okay, well, I think we've given them ample opportunity to show their imagery. The next thing I'd like to move on to is the Ozzy and Black Sabbath imagery. And we've got, from Diary of a Madman, we've got an image, the album cover, and we've got the crazed-looking Ozzy looking like some mad magician with the upside-down cross and looking like some sort of an alchemist setting or something along those lines.
Yeah, this is a very interesting album cover because he presents himself and markets himself as the Prince of Darkness of all things, Interestingly, Oz is identified in the OTO once again through Crowley's writings. Book number 77, or Liber 77 in Crowley's canon, is known as Book Oz, or the Thelemic Rites of Man. So that's kind of interesting in and of itself. Also, Ozzy is tied into this incident with this bat that he had bit the head off of during a concert.
One quick interjection. I've heard that that's not necessarily true. I've heard the story that Frank Zappa called him up and told him, hey, I don't know if that's true or not, but, milk it for all it's worth. And just my personal belief on the whole thing is that maybe there wasn't a real bat, but that's maybe neither here nor there. But certainly the imagery has, gained a lot of momentum over time. And the act,
I was just going to say it's most likely an apocryphal story that's made up. And because there have never really been any independent confirmation of this actually taking place. Mm-hmm. Any statements from people who have actually been at a concert where they saw this. Mm. And this supposedly happened in Des Moines, Iowa, at a concert in, I think it was January of 1981. And if we hear about this, it's always from Sharon Osbourne and her promotion team. It's never from, I'm Joe Blow and I was at the concert, and yes, I was in the front row and this definitely happened. And as you just pointed out, it's been a veritable gold mine for him in terms of elevating him from what he once was a minor fringe character in terms of heavy metal music. And now he's this legendary figure that has been largely created by the media, for the masses. So this imagery of the devil worshiper and the Prince of Darkness has suited him very well.
Yeah, it's interesting as well that, since he's gotten onto a lot of other, pharmaceutical drugs, and, he's really not the old Ozzy that he used to be when he was just drinking and doing, your illegal drugs, that this is the Ozzy that's been promoted, this drugged out, shell of a man has been, even the president has embraced him at certain levels, and that to me is never a good sign when somebody like that is being embraced by the establishment. But I want to show a couple of Black Sabbath album cover images as well, and certainly, they might have been or might be considered the first band to really use the occult and this sort of esoteric symbolism, in a real comprehensive way, where it just, pretty much they're one and the same. Black Sabbath is pretty much synonymous with all of this symbolism. And the Black Sabbath Born Again record cover from 1983 is an interesting one where it shows the little devil child, freshly born, looking around, looking kind of hungry.
Yeah.
And then on the back, I'm sorry.
Once again, these heavy metal bands, and this was one of the reasons why I really didn't touch a lot on this part of the story in this essay, is simply because it's so well known and it's been covered by other people. I wanted to talk more about the Beatles, for instance, because a lot of people don't connect the Beatles to occultism, even with Crowley being on Sgt. Pepper and everything that we talked about a few minutes ago. So these images of and these names of songs and the contents of the songs in the Black Sabbath albums that we are very familiar with incorporate all these themes of horror movies and all these dark images of sacrifice and drug taking and smoking pot and so on and so on.
And I'm sure you're familiar with the Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath album cover that has the front cover with the 666 and all that, and then the back cover seems as if the exorcism has been performed or something of that nature, and everything seems to be a lot calmer. We have an image, I believe, upcoming here pretty soon of that as well. But definitely Black Sabbath is, one of the ones that we think of quite a bit, and it's we're showing that currently. Okay, the next band I'd like to move on to, and I don't know that you've really touched on this band so much, but in my estimation, this is the most occult band probably that there is as far as just a mainstream rock band, and that is Blue Oyster Cult. Their origins are really kind of questionable. Their manager, Sandy Pearlman, helped put them together supposedly, and they had gone through a couple of incarnations as Soft White Underbelly and then the Stock Forest Group, and they're kind of close to your neck of the woods. They're from Long Island initially, you being from Buffalo. And I'm showing the Spectres album cover where there's an obvious seance, the clock is hitting at midnight, there's a hand coming through an open window looking very eerie, looking very otherworldly. And then the back cover of this album as well shows these refracted red laser-looking lights bouncing off the eyes of one of the members and being seemingly directed by the guitar player Buck Dharma. And again, the prominent clock striking midnight in the background. It just seems very ritualistic and very magical. And we have other imagery as well from other record covers. Well, certainly the broken cross, their main logo symbol, and the upside down question mark incorporated into the cross. Certainly, it definitely raises eyebrows. I used to wear shirts on occasion when I was younger that had that on there, and people would often stop me and basically want to pray for my soul that I was wearing that shirt when I was younger. And then also the imagery on Fire of Unknown Origin. It shows a Blue Oyster Cult basically, and they're holding blue oysters, and they're having all sorts of imagery, pentagrams and otherwise, and they're having scarabs and things of that nature incorporated in their facial painting. And Blue Oyster Cult is interesting as well in that they often incorporated the extraterrestrial with the Egyptian symbolism, and it seems as if maybe they were onto this ancient astronaut kick as well, because it's so prevalent in a lot of the artwork that graces the album covers back and front and the interior sleeves. And I just wonder how much they were maybe into the whole ancient astronaut thing. Not to mention, one last thing quickly, they're on the live record that they have, well, one of the live records, On Your Feet or On Your Knees, the singer has a little section in one of the songs, and he talks about Lucifer, but he calls him by his first name, Lou. And also one other thing, the publishing company for Blue Oyster Cult is the letter B, period, O, apostrophe, C-U-L-T, B occult. That is their publishing company. So.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh yeah, delve into that. Blue Oyster Cult, I think, is where you will find the treasure trove of occult symbolism more so than any other rock band that has even a minor, amount of notoriety. And so they've definitely used it to the hilt, as much as possible.
Yeah, in fact, I've seen them in concert a bunch of times in the late '70s and the early '80s, and like for instance, the one thing that I found interesting was on their album Agents of Fortune, which has their biggest hit on
Actually,
it.
we have an image of that.
Don't Fear the Reaper.
Yes.
Got the tarot cards on the cover and all that stuff once again. And it's so you wonder, as a fan, when I was a teenager, I would wonder where this was coming from. And you never were sure if it was a marketing kick or if they were trying to convert people's belief systems over from the whatever they happened to be at the moment to whatever they wanted them to begin to believe occult-wise. And, so as I got older and I started to look into these symbols and the basis of marketing, which I took in college and had several successful businesses throughout the years, I began to understand that it was not only a way of marketing, but it also was a way of changing people on a very deep level in terms of their own belief systems and their mindsets. And, Blue Oyster Cult is a very interesting band with this extraterrestrial business that they keep interjecting into their music. And, you wonder if, once again, if this is something that is predictive in nature, where it's talking about something that could happen in our near future, for instance, or if it's just some wild idea, some dude wrote a song and it's about a space alien. So it kind of makes you wonder.
Yeah, I'd have
Definitely.
to say I'm quite curious, and I have been for a number of years. They've been a band that's intrigued me probably more than any other band over time since I've been familiar with them. And I think the first time I saw them was in '81 at a Six Flags amusement park in Dallas. Well, actually, technically Arlington here in Texas, but that was another one of those life-changing experiences for me. And then there are some artists that I'm going to cover as well that maybe, or that I'd like to speak about as well, that are maybe not so well known and we wouldn't normally think of. Todd Rundgren from the band Nas, or the Nas, released an album called Initiation that shows what some may be familiar with as from the Da Vinci representation of man, the man with his arms and legs outstretched, superimposed over the pentagram.
Yep.
And that's the album cover. And then also side 2 of this album Initiation is basically a musical tribute to some themes from a woman called Alice A. Bailey and a book called A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. And so the whole side 2 is related to that. It's actually called Treatise on Cosmic Fire, and then it has its subsections that are having various esoteric and occult symbolism related to that. And I thought that was interesting that he embraced that writing for an entire, side of this album. So I don't really know his personal beliefs. I guess maybe he's dillied and dallied into some of this Eastern stuff or Eastern tinge stuff. I can't say for certain, but I thought it was interesting, and I wanted to just bring that to the public's attention as well.
Well, the other interesting thing about Alice Bailey and the Theosophy people, Blavatsky and so on and so forth, is that they originally were set up as this organization called the Lucifer Trust.
Actually, that is technically incorrect. There was Lucifer Publishing initially, but there was never a Lucifer Trust. I'm pretty confident that I'm accurate in that.
My mistake then.
No problem. That's a popular misconception.
Yeah, they did have like a newsletter or something that was called Lucifer. Correct?
Well, actually, Blavatsky's magazine was called Lucifer, and then as a way of paying homage to that, that's why, my understanding is that's why Bailey named initially the publishing Lucifer Publishing, but then it was changed to Lucis Publishing, as that was they quickly realized that was, bad publicity, and so that was changed.
Negative.
Certainly. And so there are other artists that people may not be very familiar with, but they've definitely incorporated some of the symbolism in the names as well. There's a band called Lucifer's Friend with an album called Banquet that shows an elaborate castle-looking setting and a banquet table with a candelabra. It looks very spooky, and this band, they never gained much notoriety, really. They were more infamous than anything, but just the name Lucifer's Friend is quite provocative. And this band uses a lot of symphonic and orchestral stuff, instrumentation within their music, and so maybe that's the reason why it didn't really take off so well. Also, there's a band from the 70s called White Witch that I'm showing imagery from, and they wore face paint a little bit, not full face paint, but they have, one guy has a number 13 and the number 7 on his face, and they use Ankh-like symbolism. They also have on the back cover at the very bottom, it's not easily seen, but again, they use a lot of the song titles and what have you are very esoteric as well, and they have on their shirts and stuff different imagery. So this seemed like, certain bands definitely embrace these concepts enough to integrate it into their art to this degree, and it's just quite interesting. I would like to go now to speak, and I'd like to get your comment on this as well. We here in Austin definitely, I'll go ahead and use the word take pride, or use the phrase take pride in the fact that psychedelic music originated here in this city of Austin with a band that initially really kicked off in 1965 called the 13th Floor Elevators. And their first record, The Psychedelic Sounds of the 13th Floor Elevators, which was released in '66, the back cover features, and they have the eye atop the pyramid as their imagery, and then the philosophy that they embrace, which is written about on the back cover, talks about a lot of esoteric ideas as well, and again shows the eye atop the pyramid. Did you have any comments about those guys?
Yeah, I guess that the leader of this band is a relative of what's his name? Kenny Rogers, I guess.
Oh no, that's not exactly right. Actually, Leland Rogers, the brother of Kenny Rogers, owned the record label International Artist. That the first psychedelic bands that were from Texas, this is just a historical fact. It's not like I'm trying to brag that much, but all these psychedelic bands were from Austin and Houston initially. They were on this label, and they in turn later went to influence the bands like the Warlocks, which became the Grateful Dead, the Great Society, which became Jefferson Airplane, and a lot of these San Francisco bands. But they definitely were very steeped in this esoteric symbolism. Also, the band called the Golden Dawn, their album was called Power Plant, but on the reverse of their record, and there's psychedelic and drug imagery, but they also have their little credo or philosophy written out on the back cover that talks about physical existence and metaphysical ideas and their relation to one another. That definitely is pretty thought-provoking stuff. And
the interesting thing about the logo for the 13th floor elevators is the uncapped pyramid that is shown has 11 levels to it, and the number 11 is associated and very tightly tied into the concept of magic, and that is because it represents the melding, if you will, of the hexagram and the pentagram, or the 6 and the 5, which give us 11. And we have the all-seeing eye, which is in place of the capstone, which in itself is represented on the back of the Great Seal of the United States, and it's on every dollar bill. And it's a symbol that everybody should be familiar with. Anyone that has anything to do with money should notice represented on the back of the dollar.
And certainly students of esoteric symbolism that study corporate logos as well, I think would find that that's a very, very common and prevalent symbol as well.
Just like one example is Fidelity Investments.
Yes.
Has a very, very similar logo to the 13th floor elevators.
There is a British woman named Kate Bush that I'm sure you would be familiar with, and hopefully some of our viewers are as well. And she definitely used a lot of esoteric symbolism, and she incorporated a prayer called the Gayatri. She did the Lesser Banishing ritual, or an adaptation of it. Those are both from the album The Red Shoes. There's a whole lot of stuff. All of her records have quite a bit actually, of esoteric symbolism, talking about having precognition, ESP type things, just a whole lot of stuff. I mean, that's difficult to get into as well with the little bit of time that we have remaining. But she's one of the more, I guess, mainstream in a way, but she's certainly helped influence a lot of the alternative artists as well throughout time, and she still is recording, and as far as I know, I haven't heard her most recent record, but I'm sure it's still very pregnant with this symbolism as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this is that I have a side of my family who is involved in the Illuminati. That's one of the reasons why I do what I do. And what I have learned from these people, and being on kind of like the outside of observing this, is that there's no true total smashing success that somebody can obtain in this lifetime, and this includes the entertainment industry, without becoming a member of this club, so to speak. So a lot of these very famous musicians, like David Bowie or Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page, and the Beatles and the Stones, Mick Jagger in particular, they are not allowed to reach these pinnacles of success unless they do join this Illuminati group. And the other interesting thing that you just brought out about the Kate Bush album Red Shoes and the banishing ritual of the pentagram and hexagram was something I observed Jimmy Page do in concert. And I had wrote about this in this essay that we're talking about here tonight, which is entitled Occult and Kabbalistic Symbolism in Rock Music, which is available on my website.
Right.
And I got an email back from a guy who said, I am a practicing magician, and I thought I was the only person on the planet that noticed that Jimmy Page had done this in concert. And when I saw that you wrote about this, he says, thank you for mentioning this, because now people will believe me when I tell them that I saw this in concert.
Very interesting stuff, to say the least. What was I going to mention as well? As far as I do have one or two anomalies to mention as far as what you're saying about the people attaining some measure of success. So there seems to be something where that may not apply in every instance, because you've still got your Hansons and your Hootie and the Blowfish type bands as well that, I just can't imagine that they're doing, the black occult rituals behind the scenes before they go on stage and things of that nature. So I think there must be some anomalies where there are successful bands that haven't sold their souls, let's say. I don't know. I guess the jury's still out on that, and maybe some people would say that type of music is truly the most satanic music of all. But
well, actually, Corey, the two bands that you just mentioned, the Hansons and Hootie and the Blowfish, both are no longer successful.
That's true. They didn't have longevity. That's true. That is interesting.
Of what they originally set out doing, they're much lower than they were then. It was just an observation of some things that I had been told and some things that I had seen happen within my own family.
Right.
there's also the idea of the useful idiot, too.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget that a big part of the Illuminati agenda is to provide distraction and to point you off into an opposing direction. And it could very well be that these teeny bopper bands are providing that type of distraction within the context of what we're talking about tonight.
Well, that's very enlightening to consider it in that context, so I'm going to definitely chew on that a bit. That's something to consider. As you said, they have not had the longevity that some of these other bands, like the Stones, for instance, have had, and some of these other guys. The last images I'm showing as we're wrapping up here are of some of the jazz musicians that I don't know if you're that familiar with. Currently, I'm showing Billy Cobham, a drummer, his album Magic. Again, it's just the imagery that he's using, and if we could show the image and get rid of me, that would be, I would really appreciate that. But Billy Cobham is one musician, and then there are several others as well that we have other images of. If my producer would be so kind as to change the image so that we can see some of these others that I've got here at the end. Anything, again, as we're winding up here in the last few minutes, please add any last final comments that you'd care to. Kent?
Yeah, sure. I guess the bottom line here is this. All intelligent people are looking for answers beyond what the establishment puts before us as explanations for why things are the way they are. And I believe that some of these highly intelligent musicians, whether they're jazz people or rock people or blues or whatever, are looking for these answers that are just not within these establishment systems. So this could very well be the reason that you see some of this stuff beyond obvious, practitioners who are embedding that aspect into their music, such as we spoke about Jimmy Page. And so this whole subject, as you said, we could go on for hours and hours and hours. There are many, many examples of this. I just picked a few that were not talked about so often so that I wasn't beating a dead horse that had already been covered 50 million times previously.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I try to do with all that I do on my website, controversypapers.net, is I try to interject concepts that are not discussed or are afraid to be talked about and present new ideas and new thoughts about those concepts.
Well, I do appreciate the research that you've done. I'm glad that I've had an opportunity to become acquainted with you, and definitely pleased that you're able to take the time and trouble to come be a guest, the call in to be a guest on the show. I hope to get this on the net before it's all said and done so that other people can share this as well. We are definitely wrapping up real quick here. Kent, Daniel Bentkowski, thank you so much for calling in and joining us. I do very much appreciate that, and I hope to speak to you again sometime in the near future. I want to thank my producer, Chris, for commanding the helm of the Starship Esoterica. I'd like to thank Donna for helping navigate, and I'd like to thank all of you out there, Austin in the viewing area, for tuning in. Stay tuned next week, another interesting show. Take care, folks. Have a nice evening. We'll see you soon.